Welcome to Pimpy's Investment Chat, where we keep investment talk simple. And here's your host, Pimpy.
What is going on out there, peeps? Let's get back to Iraq. There's a lot going on. Some interesting speeches coming from the United Nations. Sauder has a response. I think is an interesting one. So let's get into this. Before we get started, do me a favor and hit the thumbs up button. If you're not a subscriber, please do so, because when you do, it helps out the channel, and I certainly do appreciate it, especially now. If you're thinking about buying gold and silver, head on over to our friends over there at Money Metals Exchange. The link is down below in the description. If you are a first-time buyer and you spend more than $100, use promo code Pimpy, P-I-M-P-Y, and you will get a free half ounce of silver. Doesn't she look like a scolding mother? Alright, it looked like AlAbadi was getting drilled about what happened during the protest. We know that his security forces were, well, some of them were participating in some not so lawful activities, like shooting protesters. AlAbadi did respond to it, as well as other questions about what is going on over in Iraq. You can see right here, it says AlAbadi said, "We were on the brink of a civil war." That's what I was talking about. Sauder had the right to form the government, but he made a mistake. Yes, he did. To the Prime Minister, AlAbadi stated that the country was on the verge of a civil war following the bloody confrontations in a forfeited green zone in the center of the capital of Baghdad between supporters of the Sauderist movement on the one hand and the security forces and armed factions on the other hand. But he stressed that Sauder has the right to form the next federal government. However, made a mistake and missed the opportunity after the withdrawal of his bloc from parliament and the political process. So I agree with that, to be honest with you. I mean, if you're not going to participate in the government, then maybe you shouldn't have a say-so. It's kind of hard to say, because I really think that Sauder is the better of the two evils. So AlAbadi answered the question. The newspaper asked him about the day of the bloody confrontation in the green zone, saying, "Yes, we were on the brink of a civil war, but the government worked with all wisdom and measures so as to not be dragged into that," adding that it was the two parties' bet that the government would be with a party, but I took the decision is not to be a party. In other words, participate in the protest. He added that during the 24-hour of intense conflict, I used all my capability and made all possible communications and gave clear, explicit, and firm directions to security forces to remove the specter of civil war. And I succeeded. This is my decision from the first day of the work of my government, is to not be the party to any conflict and to maintain moderation and balance. I firmly believe that we must move away from being drawn into violence. You know, this is one of the reasons why I think AlAbadi deserves the right to continue being the Prime Minister. He's been put in a really bad position. He's doing a great job of balancing things out. AlAbadi was asked about the goal of the demonstrators on August 29th. As a result of events in the green zone, AlAbadi said on that day there was chaos amongst all parties involved. Both sides had decisions based on wrong data that dragged them into the arena of confrontation. He noted that all parties tried to flex their muscles, and some parties tried to express their anger, but they made a mistake in choosing a way to express it, indicating that the beginnings were spontaneous. And we succeeded in removing the demonstrators from the government palace peacefully. And the demonstrators were determined to leave parliament also. However, things developed between the two parties and suddenly ended up between them in a dangerous armed confrontation. This is why I always stress the need to consolidate the values of democracy, adhere to the mechanisms of the modern civil state, and use diplomacy and dialogue and understanding in accordance with the logic of the modern civil state. Now, this is an interesting question that the reporter asked AlAbadi about Sauder. He said, regarding the goal of the Sauderists, was it a coup or isolating leaders through confrontation with the Greens? AlAbadi said that there was no intention of a coup or anything like that at all. There was popular anger that was sometimes expressed in improper ways, and it was also accompanied by the unacceptable use of weapons of violence. And in the end, both sides miscalculated and got involved in bloodshed. See, that's the same crap we got going on here in our country. You know what I mean? About what happened on January 6th. This is a coup. It's a coup. Anyways, we won't get into that. So the article goes on, and AlAbadi, being a statesman that he is, handled it very well. I do like this article because I brought up this very subject that Sauter's going to talk about here. And I suggest that we do it here as well. Sauter thanks Plashart, warns the Security Council against Bahar al-Alam. Try that 10 times when you're drunk. And agrees to dialogue on one condition. And I like his condition. And the same thing should be done here in the United States, by the way. This is Tuesday. The leader of the Sauterist movement praised the briefing of the international representative, Ms. Janine Plashart, before the UN Security Council, warning the Council against listening to the speech of the representative, Bahar al-Alam. Not easy to say. Well, he agreed to dialogue with the political blocs, provided that it was public. Of course, he don't want to get killed. Sauter said in a tweet seen by the news, I listened carefully to the session of the United Nations Security Council on Iraq. I have some comments on it. First, regarding the briefing of the United Nations representative, and it caught my attention in what she said, is that the main reason for what is happening in Iraq is due to corruption that everyone agrees on. Yes, that's politics just about everywhere. And he said, yes, this is very true and accurate. And the first step for gradual reform is the non-participation of the old faces, parties, and people in the next government according to the aspirations of the reference and the aspirations of the rebellious people. See, I talked about this. I mentioned that our Constitution allows us a right to declare our independence against a government of tyranny, which is our government now. I suggested that they remove every single politician out of there and vote in a whole new group of people to start running our nation. This will wean out any corruption that is there. That's what Sauter's talking about. He's saying the same thing. If you want to have reform and you want to get rid of the corruption, get rid of all the old faces. Put in a bunch of new people. I'm not saying that's going to eliminate corruption altogether, but it would do away with it at that moment. And then you can start reestablishing policies and procedures and guidelines, new ones that should be followed, and laws that should be followed and not broken by our own politicians to prevent this as much as possible. Sauter went on to say, we agree to a dialogue if it is in the public in order to exclude all participants in the previous political and electoral process and to hold the corrupt accountable under the cover of an impartial judiciary. We also look forward to the assistance of the United Nations in this regard. I mean reform, albeit gradually. Sauter went on to say he doesn't mind the United, which is unusual. He said he don't mind the United Nations being involved with what's going on as long as they don't try to get involved with trying to form the government. But trying to weed out the corrupt, trying to do what they can to bring in new elections, he doesn't have a problem with it. This is another thing I wondered about the United Nations. I said, why don't the United Nations just threaten Chapter 7 all over again? But apparently there's something different. It's called a trusteeship. Politicians warn Plashart briefing may push Iraq towards international trusteeship. It said the Iraqi politician said on Wednesday that the briefing of the United Nations Special Representative Janine Plashart at the United Nations Security Council may push towards guardianship over Iraq. The trusteeship system applies to countries that are defined in the international law as deficient in sovereignty and are subject, according to special conditions, to an agreement whose implementation is supervised by the Trusteeship Council of the United Nations. There's a part of me that goes, where do they get the nerve? It's none of their business. The people should be responsible for who's in charge of their countries. So here they are. This is something I said might happen if the United Nations got involved. They might decide to put Iraq in some kind of punishment like Chapter 7, but not Chapter 7, obviously. It's called a trusteeship. The international trusteeship system came as an alternative to the mandate system that was applied during the era of the League of Nations, which was replaced by the United Nations with its establishment in 1945 in order to settle the situation of the colonial countries in accordance with international legal legitimacy that moved them gradually from the situation of complete colonialism to the transitional situation followed by complete independence. Now this is a biggie. OPEC Plus agrees to reduce production by 2 million barrels per day. That is huge. This is really going to affect countries all around the world. We're going to be moving into wintertime here, and they're talking about reducing the amount of oil that's going out. So the media was reciting informed sources that the OPEC Plus group agreed in a meeting today, Wednesday, to reduce the group's production by 2 million barrels per day, and that this would be starting from the next November. in a move aimed to supporting prices that witnessed in the third quarter their first quarterly loss in 2 years. The significant cuts approved by OPEC Plus group came despite pressures from the United States and other consuming countries to pump more oil into the market already suffering from tight supplies. Reports indicated that the OPEC Plus reduction will lead to the recovery of the oil prices, which fell to about $90 after they were up to $120 3 months ago, due to the fears of global economic recession, raising U.S. interest rates, and the rise in the dollar's power, obviously. All this is going to do is add to all the crap that's already going on. More reasons to reduce the world's population, in my opinion. You're going to freeze people to death. People are not going to be able to get supplies, not going to be able to get food. Gas is going to cost too much, which I've been saying for the longest time as part of the World Economic Forum's plan all along.